many doors I couldn't think to dream. Just imagine what I can do when you believe. Alone in my room, I cried, Lord, why you love me.
Hey, everybody. This is Voices of Wisdom, incredible conversations that feed the mind, move the heart, and lift the soul. I'm your host, Sabrina Nichole, and I'm so glad you've joined us. March is Women's History Month, and we're elevating the voices of amazing women who are using their gifts to spread love, healing, and hope in the world. Simply put, these are women doing God's work. And speaking of God's work, we're sending a special thanks to our sponsor, The Kindled Life, a company on a mission to spread hope and breast cancer awareness. Check out their website in the video description and place an order in support of breast cancer warriors. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Sabrina Nichole, and you are watching Voices of Wisdom. I am so happy that you've decided to tune in with us today, and I am even more excited, actually elated, to be joined today by Shirley Beatty, Executive Pastor of Life of Worship Ministries in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. And all this month, because it is March, and March is Women's History Month, we're going to be talking about women doing God's work. So elevating the voices of women who are doing great things for God in God's kingdom in traditional ways and non-traditional ways. And so, Shirley, thank you for joining us today.
Sabrina, thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to be your guest. I'm honored that you thought of me, you considered me for an opportunity to talk about, women in ministry.
Absolutely. And, when I think about women in ministry and when I think about wisdom that we can learn from one another, I can't think of a better person to start this conversation off with, because how long have you been in ministry? And tell us exactly what an executive pastor does.
So I've been in ministry. Pastor Beatty, my husband, he got his call into ministry in 1995. So I was, we labored together in ministry from 1995 to today. But I got my call into the ministry in 2006, and I did some schooling. I did my initial sermon in 2008. So we've been in ministry for it'll be 30 years next year that, we've been laboring together doing God's work.
That's amazing. 30 years is a long time. 30 years is longer than some of us have been living.
Yes.
And so I know you've got lots of stories, lots of wisdom that you can share with us. Talk to us about what your calling was like. What was that experience? People say when God called me, I wasn't able to sleep until I said yes. Is that your story, or what is your story?
So that wasn't exactly my story. I knew that I was called to the preaching ministry, like for some time, just trying to dodge it, I guess, or trying to make my own way, make my own ministry way, and just finally surrendering to do what God has called me to do, and God reassured me that this is what he wanted me to do in the preaching ministry. Everybody struggles with the call, as we call it, because it's such a heavy weight to surrender yourself to that call, because there's a huge responsibility, not only to what the ministry is God has called you to, but also to God himself, because you don't want to lead anybody astray. And I think that's probably the biggest weight, to make sure that you're doing what God has called you to do. It wasn't like I surrender, I'm ready, Lord, It was definitely a struggle to get to that point.
I'm fascinated. So you know me, I'm going to ask you to unpack just a little bit the dodging. What exactly, other than, the concern about maybe leading people astray, was there anything else that made you go, no, I don't think I want to do this?
A lot of stuff, because so when we were in our home church, we were doing our ministry gifts and stuff, and of course we felt comfortable with what we're doing. But then when Pastor Beatty got the call, to go into, the pastoral preaching ministry, I just thought it's like, oh my gosh, this is not what I want to do, because like I said, you first of all, you understand the sacrifice that's involved with the pastoral ministry, and just the challenges that go along with ministry itself, and the dynamic of how it affects your family, because you want the ministry, you want that to be successful. So you kind of have to figure out how to balance all of that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure, in the audience, there are going to be lots of folks who are in pastoral ministry in some way who can identify, but say a little bit more about some of the sacrifices that you've had to make in doing God's work.
You kind of have to just pick and choose what you're going to do and what you can't do. Like if there's an event going on that is a family event and there's a ministry obligation, then you kind of have to determine like what to do. Do I forego the ministry obligation to do the family event, or do the family of, just trying to weigh those out to figure out what's going to be the best avenue, the best, what's the best route to take for that.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I remember when I was in school, I was being taught by a professor who it was a man, but he stood up and he said, I promised my wife that I would not allow the church to be my mistress.
Yes.
And that was really powerful. And so I'm wondering, and how have you been able to maintain your motherhood, your being a wife, and caring for yourself when ministry work or God's work maybe does pull at you to do things? How do you keep that in balance?
One of our fathers in the ministry, told us is like God first, family, and then church. So you have to keep that in perspective. If not, if God is telling you to do something, then naturally you do that. But if it's the church that's kind of pulling at you, trying to put extra obligations on you, then you kind of have to know your boundaries. Like this is a church thing, not a God thing. So you really gotta know how to, when to say no. And I think a lot of times when we get in ministry, we think we're just so excited about what God has called us to do that we kind of want to go, and then we're not taking care of ourselves. And before you know it, we have burnout.
Yeah.
Burnout is a very real thing because we don't know how to balance. I guess that's a big word for me, like to know how to balance ministry, our calling, our families, the church, ourselves. If not, then we're going to be unbalanced, trying to do a whole bunch of one thing and not trying to look at the whole gamut of who we are.
That's so good. And, we can talk about balance and burnout just in general, but I'm wondering, how does that really play out for women in particular, especially in the United States and with our particular society, these stereotypes or these ideas, these pressures of what women should do, and the roles that we should play with our families. So what are some of the unique challenges in your experience, or based on maybe even your colleagues that you have been in communication with? What are some of those unique challenges to that balance for women, and how do we overcome that?
I think one of the things is for single women is trying to balance single motherhood and trying to do ministry, because sometimes your family get neglected because you thinking that I gotta do this, gotta fulfill that ministry. And I think that's one thing that we really need to understand is how to answer our call, how to be successful in our calling, or we're so into our calling that we don't look at everything else around us, don't look at the big picture, that we're just trying to focus on ministry, and then we're forgetting about our families, we're forgetting about ourselves. So we got to really know how to mesh it out so that it's balanced. If not, it could be worse for us. For single women, I think that's an issue, just trying to figure out how to balance like not having a partner to help out and trying to do ministry and trying to do family. And for a married person just trying to balance motherhood if you got children and your husband. And because if your husband's not in ministry, that could be an issue, like if you're focusing too much time in ministry and you're not giving you're not having that proper balance at home, that can be an issue also.
You mentioned that as women, kind of knowing how to answer our call, and how to be balanced in all of these things. It reminds me of an article I read that was talking about some of the barriers that women in ministry identified. It talked about the stained glass ceiling. And one of the things it pointed out was there's a lack of mentorship. There's a lack of teaching,
Mhm.
through modeling for women,
Mhm.
largely because there aren't very many women in higher leadership positions.
Correct.
So what do you think about, you're nodding your head, so I think you agree, but what would you say to that? What do you think about that?
That's a good point. And I like that you said not a lot of women in higher leadership positions, a lot of women in ministry, women doing great work for God, but and on the top tiers is kind of male dominant. I'm not trying to say there's anything wrong with that, but a lot of times we are very green when we start ministry, and we are gung-ho, we think we can do it all,
Mhm.
and we don't have that mentor to let us know it's like, you got to pace yourself. You're going to have challenges, you're going to have struggles. Mentors would be great, because I think a lot of times when you're called into ministry, you may not have a mentor, so you're just kind of trying to feel your way and trying to figure out like what God, what am I supposed to do? Everybody say, pray to God. God is going to show you what you're supposed to do. You understand your calling. But
Mhm.
mentors are great. Someone that's already gone ahead of you that can help you to show you like, this is your ministry, and this is the things that I've faced, and this is what I dealt with, or just to kind of guide. I think that would great guidance.
Yeah, yeah. I'm always fascinated that, the Bible really talks about teachers
Mhm.
and learning from others, but I don't know how well we put into practice mentorship and
Mhm.
actually taking people under our wings. And how beneficial do you think it would be able to have a mentor who's a woman as
Mhm.
opposed to a mentor who's a man?
I think it would be great. Women understand women. I think women identify with what's going on, our emotions, what we feel, what we're experiencing. They can, we could relate to each other. Woman, man, mentor. Probably can mentor to a certain level. Like things that, they can tell you to look out for or what to expect. But I think a woman to woman mentor would be fantastic.
Okay. Some benefit in doing that. And, just to be clear, we're not saying men can't teach women anything,
Right.
or,
Right. Right.
but
Right. Right.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree. I think there's something about having a shared lived experience
Correct.
that adds just a special layer to that mentoring, and that support. Another article I read, was talking about loneliness,
Hmm.
as a challenge to women in ministry. Have you experienced that at over the 30 years? If so, or even if not, how did you overcome that?
Probably sometimes, some instances of loneliness. Maybe you feel like, especially being a pastor's wife, just trying to understand what that's all supposed to look like, and trying
Mhm.
to, figure all of that out. But I think one of the things for me is just to kind of encourage myself, to kind of be okay with who I am, and I don't have to be like somebody else, or
Mhm.
any other pastor's wife, but just to be who God has called me to be, and just kind of get in and do, the ministry that God has called me to, and I don't have to kind of be like someone else. But I have definitely, read articles, heard people, speak of being lonely, because women in ministry, a lot, sometimes people may not know how to interact,
Yeah.
or they feel like, I can't get too close to this minister. There's
Yeah.
always this hierarchy, like I can't be friends with this, because she's a minister, kind of thing. So I think that loneliness does happen. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And you said something that just kind of hit me in the gut. And that is your experience is really twofold.
Mm-hmm.
You are an executive pastor, so you
Mm-hmm.
are, in a higher level of leadership within ministry, but you are also a pastor's wife, or
Mm-hmm.
what we like to say in the first
The
lady,
first
you
lady,
know. So,
whatever that is.
right, right. It's a very interesting and unique situation. I've known pastors' wives who that was their role. They were the pastor's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then in your case, you are the pastor's wife and the executive pastor of the church. And so, talk to us a little bit about what an executive pastor does as opposed to the senior pastor, which is your husband.
A church should be run like a business. I don't know if people understand that, because if you just go to church like on Sunday and you come back home, you don't see all the ins and outs of what goes on behind Sunday morning, besides the preaching and the praise and worship, those aspects. But an executive pastor is kind of handles the everyday administrative function of the church. What's happening with the building, what's happening with budgeting, what's happening
Wow.
with ministry. And the senior pastor kind of relieve some of the pressure on the senior pastor, so he can be more focused on shepherding and leading the congregation. That's kind of what the executive pastor does in a nutshell, among other things.
Sure, sure. Because
Yes.
I imagine you also, while the senior pastor does a lot of the shepherding, I imagine you also have to do some of that as well. That
Yes.
you're getting phone calls late in the night for, people saying, will you pray for me? Or
Mm-hmm.
letting you know someone passed, or whatever the
Correct.
case may be. But your primary focus, it sounds like, is to handle all things business as it relates to making sure ministry happens.
Correct. That is correct.
That's a big responsibility.
That is correct. Yes.
So if I was a woman, I mean, I am a woman, but if I was a woman who wanted to become an executive pastor, what advice would you give me?
When I was thinking about this question, because it was you kind of sent out some questions, and executive pastor is almost like a chief of staff. If you would think about the role of president, or the president of the United States, but some companies now have changed over to having chief of staffs on their payroll. So if a lady could handle that responsibility as a chief of staff, then you got to have strong leadership skills. That's for sure. And you got to know how to get along with people, how to interact with people. Those are two of the, I guess, critical things that you would need, and being organized. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense. I imagine it's not just you be sweet and syrupy all the time. I imagine there are times where you have to be assertive, times where maybe you have to redirect people. How do you balance that up against some of the thoughts or stereotypes that a woman in ministry is supposed to be submissive and soft spoken, and how do you handle that?
I think anybody in ministry, you got to have tough skin. You got to be willing to take some hard punches sometimes. And I think people don't always know that. They think like you said, they think everything is going to be nice and smooth, and my feelings are never going to be heard, and I'm never going to come up against any kind of opposition. So like I said, you got to have tough skin. You got to be able to take the roll with the punches. And I think one of the things you have to realize that it may feel personal, but I guess you got to kind of let it roll off your back and realize that it's not personal, that you're trying to operate in your calling. And I think for women, sometimes we can make it personal because we are emotional beings. So it becomes a personal thing for us.
We are relational, and definitely I could see sometimes, and I mean, just to be honest, sometimes I have to talk to myself and say, it's not personal, Sabrina, and approach things a little bit differently. And man, we talk about this thing called compassion and forgiveness.
Mhm.
How in the world do you love on, preach to, care for, shepherd people who aren't so nice and maybe do attack you? I've been thinking about Judas and
Mhm.
Jesus, and I
Mhm.
was like, once Jesus knew what Judas was doing, how was he still able to to minister and interact with him just like the others? And so that's what I think about when you talk about having that tough skin and still being true to your calling. How do you still love on people even when they haven't loved on you?
Yeah, I kind of laughed because as you were talking about that, I was like, wow, that is pretty much the whole scope of what ministry is loving people sometimes when they're unlovable.
Mm.
And if it was not for the Holy Spirit, if it was not for um, God at work within our lives, the transformation, the change, Him working in our lives, that we are able to love
Yeah.
when we get our feelings hurt, love when we're talked about. You just continue to keep, keep moving on, keep moving on.
Yeah.
And and since you're talking about it, it's almost amazing. It's like, God, how how am I doing that?
You're
But
right.
it is through the help of the Holy Spirit that we're able to just kind of keep keep
Yeah.
moving because we realize that it's bigger than where we are right now, that we're doing something that's bigger, that it's really about God. And if it calls for us to love the unlovable, love when we've been hurt, love when people talk about us, if it were not for the Holy Spirit, when we've been talked about, we could have just said, well, we ain't going this Sunday.
Right.
We're not showing up. But
Right.
it's something about God's Spirit that works within us that allows us to just keep moving, just to keep moving, no matter what, because we know that God is working on our behalf.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna tell you the truth, Pastor Shirley. I have had days where I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm done. And I needed to sit in the corner and cry, and I will never forget. I was throwing a temper tantrum. My feelings were hurt, and I heard the Holy Spirit say, "Your mascara is running. Fix your face and go do what I've told you to do." So that what you say certainly resonates with
But
me.
I laugh at you because I've heard a lot of ministers, a lot of people say, especially in the pastoral ministry. And I was talking to one of my mothers in the ministry, and we're just talking about different stuff going on, just the frustration sometimes that happen in ministry. And I was like, "Did you ever want to quit?" And she said, "Every day." And
Absolutely.
I've heard other people say every day, and I was like, "What'd you do?" She said, "I got right on back up and went back out there the next day and kept on going." So it's almost like, God knows, I guess, who's gonna keep at it,
Yeah.
because there are lots of times where you could want to just quit, like
Yeah.
just sit on the sideline. But God knows He's placed within us, I guess, that tenacity that
Yeah.
it's almost like I want to see what the end's going to be. So we just kind of keep going back. We keep going back. So God
Mhm.
knows who's going to keep at it.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. And I know there's somebody watching this going, "Oh, good, it's not just me. I'm not the only one that's
No,
like, I'm turning in my
no,
resignation, Lord."
exactly. Yes, that would be great.
Right. If I was a man who
Hmm.
wanted to support women doing God's work, I wanted to advocate for them or make things, support them, make things better for women doing God's work. What advice would you give me?
Treat women like everybody else. Don't treat women like they are beneath
Mm.
or on a, like believe, like on a different level. Like I'm here and women are there, and there are some congregations that women, or some denominations where women are kind of like I don't want to say subservient, but their
Mhm.
roles are not equal.
Mhm.
Treat women equal. That's what I
Mhm.
would say. Like, treat women equal, listen to women, treat us equal. Don't make us feel like we're invisible. Don't make us feel like we're not relevant, that we're not important. We're all a part of God's kingdom. God created everybody.
Yeah. And I would probably add one thing, if and you rebut if you don't agree, but don't act like women can't lead. We have leadership
Yes.
skills and a desire and a passion. According to the Pew Center's research, women are more religious than men in this country.
Mhm.
I think if we walked into a church, typically we would see there's more women going to church,
Mhm.
but yet not a lot of women, like we said earlier, in those leadership
Mhm.
positions. And I think we've got to really look at that. The other thing is, and you're right, there are some denominations, there's some people's theologies that say
Mhm.
women should not lead and all of that. But
Mhm.
truly, we've got lots of biblical examples of women in leadership, and I think you're right. I think we've got to be seen as equal partners in doing God's work. Even if we do it a little differently, we're still equal partners in this. So a lot of the ladies who have been speaking out about their experience have also pointed to there are a lot of churches, a lot of institutions that say that they view women as equal,
Mhm.
but in practice, they aren't
Mm.
really doing that.
Mm.
I remember reading one story where the lady was saying the male senior pastor would go to lunch and have all these meetings with the other men in
Mhm.
the church, and often she was left out.
Mm.
um, and and just how isolating that feels. So I appreciate you elevating for the men in the audience. Treat us equal, see us equal, work with us. And I also, pulling from the earlier conversation or earlier portion of the conversation, let's really look at how do we set up mentorship
Mhm.
between women,
Mhm.
so that there isn't, hopefully, that persistent feeling of isolation. So, Pastor Shirley, got to ask you, I told you this was coming. Told you this was coming. Who is your favorite woman in the Bible and why?
So I thought when you posed that question to me, so I was thinking about all the women, just kind of going through my mind. People would say Mary or Sarah or like just all a whole bunch of women. So I went back. The lady that popped in my mind was Hannah.
Mm,
Hannah desired a child, and she could because she couldn't have children, and she went to the temple and she prayed to God, and God answered her prayer and gave her a son. I chose Hannah because she was a woman of prayer, a woman of faith, and she was a woman of her word. Because after she had her baby, something that she wanted so dearly, she was willing to give it back to God.
wow. Wow. That's beautiful. And you're right. Most people go to the popular celebrity women in the Bible. But Hannah's story is certainly a powerful one. Last question. I'm springing this one on you as a surprise.
Oh gosh, you said no surprises.
This will be an easy one. Hopefully. Um, as you think about women doing God's work, is there one woman in your life or in your experience that you would say, this is a woman who has done or is doing God's work?
So this is who I'm gonna shout out. I think Sarah Jakes Roberts
Mm,
is doing God's work in a powerful way. I listen to her sermons sometimes, and I think she's doing God's work because she is able to reach people that can relate to some of the things that some of the struggles. Because a lot of times when sometimes when we're open books,
yeah.
people can relate, and she's really an open book. She doesn't mind sharing her life, her struggles, and people can relate. They feel like, okay, we see how God is working in her life because she's let us in.
Yeah.
So I think she is doing God's work in an awesome way for this time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. Well, shout out to Sarah Jakes Roberts. Thank you for being a woman doing God's work. And Pastor Shirley Beatty, Executive Pastor of Life of Worship Ministries in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. Thank you for being a woman doing God's work. After this amazing interview, this amazing conversation we've had, I know that there are going to be people who are going to want to reach out, contact, visit the church. How can folks get in touch with you?
Okay, so we're on Facebook and YouTube at Life of Worship KM. You can join us on Sunday mornings for our worship services. You can contact me at shirleyBdesigns@gmail.com. And also on LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn. Those are some ways that you can reach out to me personally and to our ministry.
Fantastic. And we will make sure that we include that information in the description for this video. Make sure that you stay connected to this amazing woman of God who's doing God's work. Pastor Shirley, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Sabrina, like I said, I'm honored that you chose me. You wanted to talk with me. So I feel honored for this opportunity just to share some of my experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.